Divine Entertainment. By Orthoris. Chapter 36. Aftermath. Scholar Arc. Still day 16, evening. It didn't take long for the guards to arrive. Even though Atlas and his friends had been brought to the outskirts of the city, a huge explosion would kick the guard into overdrive and cause them to respond immediately. Unicorn mages had used wind spells to clear the dust and dirt that was still settling, revealing a gruesome sight. Where there was once a cornfield, only a huge crater remained. They estimated the crater to be around 150 feet wide, and 30 feet deep. Immediately after the discovery, they started searching for the cause. While mages scanned the crater for lingering magical energies, scores of guards scoured the vicinity. They first found Dusty's unconscious hench ponies strewn around on the ground, and soon after, Atlas's group inside the barn. After a rough explanation of the circumstances, they were brought back to the crater where the commanding guard was directing his subordinates' orders from. They were approaching a heavily armed unicorn guard, flanked by the guards who found them. The commanding officer had just finished giving his orders to a group of regular guards when his eyes fell upon the approaching group. He had a white coat and a deep blue mane. His purple and gold armor seemed more intricate than that of a regular guard, and a purple plume of hair rested atop his helmet. Atlas had to chuckle at how familiar the stallion looked. "Report." The unicorn barked at the frontmost guard. "Sir. We found these ponies in a barn about 1 mile away from here. According to them, the explosion was caused by a surge from the dark grey unicorn, sir." The guard dutifully responded while saluting. The commander's eyes locked onto Atlas's, who awkwardly waved back at him and sported an apologetic smile. "Bring them back to the base for further questioning," the commander commanded. "Do not allow them to talk on the way there, and make sure they're kept in separate rooms for now." "Sir, yes, sir," the guards surrounding them said as one. They were led away from the crater in single file, the space between them making sure they didn't talk, just as was ordered. Atlas sneaked a look back at the crater and a shiver ran down his spine. He already knew that surging was a bad thing. Regular unicorns could only damage their immediate surroundings at worst, but if that was what happened whenever he surged, he'd have to avoid it in the future at all cost. Just as he finally thought he was at peace with his new life, something happened that made him question everything anew. This time he got lucky and nobody was seriously hurt. At least not any pony who didn't deserve it. But what if the next time it happened he was within the city? The mere thought of the possibilities scared him as he turned away from the destruction he'd caused. Asterisk. It had been what felt like hours since Atlas was led into a small room by the guards. After their group arrived at the nearest guard facility, they were led inside what looked like interrogation rooms. The guards had made sure they had no chance to communicate with each other aside from shouting and put each of them in their own room. The room Atlas found himself in had no decorations whatsoever, only a table with 2 chairs facing each other occupied it. The chair opposite the door sat a nervous Atlas. By now he had spent quite a lot of time by himself, with nothing but his thoughts to keep him company. His fantasies about what the guards were going to do with him and his friends kept becoming progressively worse as time passed. What if they would lock all of them up inside a high-security prison in the middle of the mountain? What if they condemned them to spend the rest of their lives in there? If this scenario would come to pass, Atlas was well and truly fucked. Every now and again his thoughts flicked back to what happened after his surge. He actually confessed his love for Belle after she let him know how she felt about him. After thinking about it again and again, he actually wasn't quite sure about this. After all, up to this point he'd never fallen for someone. Was what he felt love or infatuation? In hindsight, he was probably just caught up in the heat of the moment. Atlas felt confused since he never actually had a girlfriend. He didn't exactly know how that would pan out going forward. Nevertheless, even though he felt that the whole thing was rushed, he was willing to try. He definitely felt something for Belle and was curious to see what might come from this development. While he was waiting for anything to happen, he played around with his hooves. idly clacking them together to try and see what sounds he could produce. From time to time, his eyes would be drawn to the door, expecting it to open and some very angry guards to enter. Alas, no one came and he was left to his own thoughts. Since there was no clock inside the room, Atlas had no idea how much time had passed already. It certainly felt like forever to him, and he wondered how his friends were faring. Judging by how much time had already passed, they were most certainly questioning them first, saving Atlas for last. He tried to remember what exactly happened back in the barn, so he would be ready for their questions. He could more or less remember everything until shortly before his surge. He could faintly remember hearing a familiar voice before his memory went dark. Atlas racked his brain to place the voice he heard to a face but came up with nothing. After a while something else resurfaced from his memory. Before he went out of control he could feel something strange happening to him. Something akin to a wave of energy washed over him. Once again his recent memories were scoured for the familiar feeling. This time, he was able to remember it happening twice before. Once when he said goodbye to vibrant colors, and the other time when he and Crimson decided to travel together. Atlas wondered if those 3 moments were somehow connected, and if those waves of energy actually did anything to him except leave him with a slight tingle. The noise of the door being opened snapped Atlas out of his ruminations, his eyes darted towards the entrance. A single pony walked in, though Atlas could see 2 guards standing outside before the door was closed. The pony had brown fur and a dark brown mane. Although he didn't wear any armor, he did wear clothes. Something akin to a coat was draped over his backside, his 2 front hooves and side sleeves keeping it in place. The coat obscured his cutie mark so Atlas had no idea what it was. The unicorn stallion carried a stack of papers with him in his magic, which he set down on the table before taking a seat opposite of Atlas. The unicorn proceeded to flip through his papers, stopping to read over a few passages on some of them and generally ignoring Atlas's presence. Atlas felt awkward watching the unicorn, wondering if he was allowed to speak up, or if he was supposed to wait quietly while the unicorn finished whatever he was doing. He silently watched the unicorn work for a few minutes until he just couldn't bear it anymore. Excuse. Mr. Atlas. The unicorn immediately stopped him. The last of the pages floated back down to the table and arranged themselves neatly in front of the unicorn. For the first time since entering the unicorn established eye contact with Atlas, acknowledging his existence. Your friends have told us a lot about you and what happened tonight, he said. But first let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Inquiring Mind, and I'm in charge of criminal investigations around here. Atlas nodded, feeling it unnecessary to introduce himself since Inquiring Mind already knew him quite well apparently. Today's events have proven to be quite a headache for me. Inquiring Mind continued. Do you have any idea how much damage you caused? I've seen the crater if that's what you mean. Atlas said, casting his eyes downwards. Yes, but it's not just structural damage you did. Your spell pretty much obliterated a whole field that was growing very important produce. I doubt that I need to tell you that we don't produce enough food as is. Atlas nodded once again. At this time we need every ounce of food we can get, thus what you've destroyed was of great value not only to the farmer but for the whole of the kingdom. A grave crime in these less than bountiful days. Inquiring Mind shook his head in disappointment. Atlas mentally prepared himself for a long time in prison. At least it sounded like they blamed Atlas alone, and his friends could at least go free. That being said, the circumstances were quite unique to say the least. Atlas perked up at those words, a faint amount of hope spreading within him. Maybe they would lessen his sentence? All of your friends have told us the same story, and there's no reason for us to believe they are lying since they were under a truth spell the whole time. Inquiring Mind pulled a page out of his stack. Thus we have reason to believe that this dusty character is to blame for the most part. Atlas allowed a smile to creep onto his face. That doesn't mean you're out of dodge yet, Mr. Atlas. Atlas's smile immediately vanished. The insights of your friend Amethyst Blade were especially valuable to us. Inquiring mind adopted a troubled look. Those inhibitor rings sound like bad news, to say the least. Could you tell me how your experience with the ring was? Inquiring mind's horn started to glow a soft orange and Atlas felt a tingly feeling around his throat. The truth spell, Atlas concluded. Well, according to Dusty, they just cancel out a unicorn's ability to channel magic through the horn. Control channeling still seems to work though, at least it did for me, Atlas answered. Interesting. Mind wrote down the new information on a paper. Mr. Amethyst Blade hasn't tried that. Thank you for this information, it might help us come up with a countermeasure. Of course, Atlas answered and left it at that. As far as your punishment goes, since the circumstances were quite unique and a surge is not exactly controllable, you can expect it to be lenient. Inquiring mind said. Especially since it was a life or death situation. Atlas nodded in acknowledgement once again. Opting to talk as little as possible as long as the truth spell was in effect. But there was something else that Mr. Amethyst Blade mentioned, that I'd like to verify myself since it's a unique situation. Inquiring mind said. He got up from his chair and went over to the door. He opened it slightly, levitating a device through the opening. The door was closed again and the device floated down onto the table before he retook his seat. Atlas seemed to recognize the device, but couldn't quite place where he had seen it before. I think you're already familiar with this test, so if you'd please. Inquiring mind gestured towards a ring that was connected to the device. Atlas looked at the transparent orb resting on top of it when he finally made the connection. This was the device used to determine a unicorn's magical affinity. Atlas complied, levitating the ring over his horn. Even though he knew now what the device was for, he couldn't quite understand why he'd need to take the test again. As expected, the orb began to glow a soft green after a while. Inquiring mind nodded but didn't do anything else. They both watched the orb as its color slowly changed to red, representing Atlas's secondary affinity. Once again Inquiring mind only gave an acknowledging nod, although he seemed to be tenser than before. Atlas was about to ask what this was all about, when the orb started to change its color again. Instead of the expected green, it seemed to lose color until only a soft pink was left. Atlas furrowed his brow as Inquiring mind released a tired sigh. The orb continued on to change to the previously expected green, leaving Atlas to his confusion. Hey! Atlas managed to say after a few moments. His jaw was slightly agape, looking towards Inquiring mind for an explanation. The pony in question said nothing at first, opting to wait and see if the phenomenon would repeat itself. Sure enough, the orb turned a soft pink a few moments later. You may take off the ring now. Mind said, a quill in his magic furiously writing something down. Atlas was still confused and wanted answers, but did as he was told. He levitated the ring off his horn and set it down next to the device while waiting for his interrogator to finish. Your friend Amethyst Blade described the spell you used to us in great detail. Inquiring mind said, setting his quill down. According to him, you created a ball of pure mana by mixing different types of condensed energy, before firing it at Dusty. A quite common way of attacking for inexperienced unicorns, to be sure. Inquiring mind rubbed his temples with his hoofs, indicating a headache coming on. Perhaps the most disturbing thing about this spell is that 3 different types of mana were used to create it. Mind's eyes fixated themselves on Alex's. In all of the kingdom's history, there has never once been a unicorn who commanded more than 2 elements at once, which makes you an unknown. A dangerous one, if today's events are anything to go by. But it was an accident. Atlas rebuked. This only happened because of the surge. If I pay attention and be careful, this could easily be avoided. Atlas saw his chance and tried to barter against his inevitable jail time. You are right. Inquiring mind said with a tired sigh. We all got lucky your surge didn't happen in a densely populated area. Still, just trusting your word is not enough for us. Atlas braced himself for whatever judgment they had decided on. At least it looked like if he was put in jail, they wouldn't cut him off completely from the outside world. Mr. Atlas. As you are right now, you are a danger to yourself and any pony around you. Inquiring Mind said. We will have you continue your education at our academy as you did up until now, so you may learn how to control your powers properly. Atlas breathed a sigh of relief. He really didn't want to go to jail. However, Inquiring Mind added. You will be placed under heavy surveillance, and if there are any signs of things getting dangerous, you will be dealt with accordingly. Additionally, you'll have to cooperate with any and all research about your triple affinity. If you so much as try and hinder any pony that requires information from you, we'll count that as an act of rebellion and lock you away. Is this understood? Yes. Atlas gulped. I understand. Very well then. Inquiring Mind said. You and your friends are free to go. One of my men will escort you back to your respective homes. Do you have any questions left? What about my days off at the academy? Atlas asked nervously. You are free to continue your life as you like, just know that no matter where you go, some pony will follow you from the shadows. Inquiring Mind said with finality. Have a good night, Mr. Atlas. Inquiring Mind got up from his chair and left the room. He briefly spoke to one of the guards standing outside, before trotting out of sight. Shortly after, the head of a guard poked into the room. Follow me, the guard said with authority. Atlas sighed a breath of relief and got up from his chair. All things considered, his punishment wasn't too bad, and it seemed like his friends got off scot-free. With a huge load off his shoulders, Atlas started following the guards towards his friends. Author's note. Hey guys, since we have now cleared a major point in the story, and a lot of things got wrapped up, I'll take this opportunity to take a little break from my scheduled releases. Since I have a lot of work coming up, and need a bit of respite from the writing schedule, I'll stop releasing every Saturday for a while. I'll still be writing, but at a more leisurely pace. I have a lot of story updates to read since they started racking up when I spent more time writing than reading, winking and laughing. Look forward to releases whenever they're done. Once again, thanks to my editor Ambrose and my proofreader Kilobytes for a job well done. Today's chapter was brought to you by this song. End author's note.